maybe voting against the Civil Rights Act, which wasn't just about governmental discrimination, but public accommodations. The idea that people who provided services that were open to the public had to do so in a non-discriminatory fashion. Let me ask you a specific so that we don't get into the esoteric hypotheticals here.
There's 10 different titles, you know, to the Civil Rights Act, and 9 out of 10 deal with public institutions, and I'm absolutely in favor of. 1 deals with private institutions, and had I been around, I would have tried to modify that. But, you know, the other thing about legislation, and this is why it's a little hard to say exactly where you are sometimes, is that when you support 9 out of 10 things in a good piece of legislation, do you vote for it or against it? And I think sometimes those are difficult situations.
And we have never seen him since. That was Rand Paul 4 years ago when he was first running for Senate from Kentucky. He has since not only been elected to the United States Senate, he's now also considered a realistic candidate for the Republican nomination for president, but he has never again come back to this show. You want to see him lie? Because today, Senator Rand Paul gave a big speech. He got lots of press. And at that, that's not true. Rand Paul repeatedly, and not that long ago, and on tape, in multiple settings, has in fact insisted that there were parts of the Civil Rights Act that he was not down with. Specifically, the big part, the big part that made all the difference in the world that everybody remembers, the part where the law was changed to tell private businesses, like, say, lunch counters in the South, that if they wanted to serve the public as a private business, they no longer had the right to do so in a racially segregated manner. That is the part Senator Paul said he kind of wasn't down with. Most of it he was okay with, but not all of it. Racism would be a bad business decision, but private ownership, you know, gives you certain rights. And Rand Paul didn't just admit that once, accidentally to me on this show, or point a lot on tape, over and over again. There's evidence. It's all in the public record.
But are you saying that had you been around at the time, you would have hoped that you would have marched with Martin Luther King, but voted with Barry Goldwater against the 1964 Civil Rights Act?
Well, actually, I think it's confusing on a lot of cases with what actually was in the Civil Rights case, because, see, a lot of the things that actually were in the bill, I'm in favor of.
A lot of the things that were in the Civil Rights Act, I'm in favor of. A lot of them, but not all of them. This guy is going to run for president. This guy, in fact, already is plainly running for president. And what he's lying about here is part of his very recent political history. It's not invisible. It's not made up. It exists on the record. But for some reason, Rand Paul thinks if he says it's not there, it isn't there. It will become invisible by him insisting it's not really there. It's like, look, I'm covering my eyes so you can't see me. You can't see me. I'm not here. Peekaboo. I'm Rand Paul. I mean, it works on babies. Maybe it'll work on the United States of America. It kind of is working on the political press so far. I mean, the press that the senator gets is somewhat astonishing given the way he talks about himself in plainly untrue ways. I mean, the headline that Rand Paul got in the New York Times just today, Rand Paul courting black support, backs changes in voting rights and criminal justice. Rand Paul, in speeches like this one he gave today, covered by the New York Times, gets a ton of national coverage. He declares himself to be a supporter, not just of voting rights for minorities, but specifically declares himself to be a supporter of the Voting Rights Act. He gets headlined as a supporter of the Voting Rights Act. He says he is a champion of the Voting Rights Act. But listen, with this guy, be more careful. Just because he says it is true about himself doesn't necessarily mean that it is true about him. I mean, look, there is actual legislation to reinstate the Voting Rights Act since the Supreme Court struck it down. This is not some hypothetical, you know, esoteric, do I support it? You mean, do I clap for it? Do I cheer for it thing? He's an active legislator in the United States of America. So if you say, do you support reinstating the Voting Rights Act? There's a way to do that. There's legislation to do that. Senator Rand Paul is not on the record saying he supports that legislation. Still, though, getting the headlines, though, for being a supporter. Why does he get these headlines? I don't know. He says it's true about himself. If you check the record, it's not true about him. On the Civil Rights Act, honestly, Rand Paul probably could get more credit, could get more political capital out of this issue if he just acknowledged that he used to be against part of the Civil Rights Act. He used to oppose anti-segregation laws applying to private businesses, but now he has changed his mind on that. Now he sees that he was wrong. Here's why he changed his mind. Here's why other people should change their mind about that too. If there is anybody else left in America who's not against the desegregation of lunch counters in the South, I mean, he could get more out of it politically if he was honest, I think, and acknowledge that he, until very recently, was against the most important parts of the Civil Rights Act. But instead, he's just lying and saying, he was never against it. He never said these things. He never said these things which he plainly said over and over and over again on the record, on tape. What, if nothing else, that deserves like a salute, right? That deserves a cheers for an almost sociopathic level of chutzpah like that. So you know what? At the end of a tough week, in celebration of politicians, at least one of them, cheerfully, blatantly lying about very checkable facts, here is how you make a drink that's called the prescription julep. It's delicious. It technically, though, like Rand Paul, is a little bit bogus. See, a real julep is from Kentucky, as we all know, made with bourbon. This is not from Kentucky. Neither is Rand Paul. I should mention he was actually born in Pittsburgh. But it's also not made with bourbon. This is made from a combination of rye and cognac. And if you like a mint julep made the typical way with bourbon, it probably sounds gross that you'd make one with rye and cognac, but trust me, this is a delicious thing. And other than not containing any bourbon, it is pretty similar to a regular mint julep. So in terms of the sweetness, you can use simple syrup where the sugar and the water are already combined into a syrup. For this drink, though, for texture purposes, I like to use just regular granular sugar and then add water right in the glass. I don't have much of a sweet tooth, so I'm only adding about a teaspoon of sugar, but you can add up to 2 or 3 times that amount depending on, your blood sugar levels and how you like them to be in the morning. Then you add about 1 ounce of water. And the sugar in the water doesn't need to be perfectly dissolved, but you basically want that to dissolve at least a little bit. Then you need some good fresh mint. You want like 6 or 8 leaves of good fresh mint. And the reason you don't drop the whole sprig in there is because the stalk kind of has the wrong texture and kind of the wrong flavor. So you just want the leaves. Then you don't need to go crazy with the muddling or anything. The mint is your friend. So you smash it up with the sugar water and the mint leaves. You can muddle if you want to, if you like have some aggression that you need to get out, but just, it's okay. You'll be fine. So you get the mint and the sugar and the water sort of incorporated. And then where you would expect to add bourbon, instead think of Senator Rand Paul and instead add 1.5 ounces of cognac or good brandy. The better the liquor you add, the better the drink, because it's not that complicated. There's 1.5 ounces. And then the thing that makes it super delicious rye whiskey. And then if you are making, you add 1/2 ounce of rye whiskey. And then if you were making a proper julep, you would have what they call powdered ice, where it's not only ice that is crushed, you then pulverize it with a giant mallet and turn it into really dry ice powder. I am, frankly, not that excellent, and every time I try to crush anything around here, I end up breaking something that costs a lot of money and then people have to come fix it. So we're just going to use plain old crushed ice. Dun, dun, dun. Thank you, Swing Away Corporation. All right, stir it up. Stir it for as long as you want. You should get the ice in there. If you got a proper julep cups are metal and they frost over, and that's how you know when they're ready. But basically, this is sort of it. This is a prescription julep. You want a big sprig of mint as your garnish. It's very boozy. It's not for sissies, except I mean sissies in a good way. You probably want a straw to go with this, but if you don't have a straw, who am I to bother you about this? As juleps go, I have to tell you, this is bogus. But it works and it's delicious. Rand Paul is lying about the Civil Rights Act, so he's bogus in that way too. But just as this julep is delicious, him lying about the Civil Rights Act politically so far is working for him. Bogus, but wonderful. Cheers. Happy weekend.